Andrew Young is one of the most influential African-American political leaders of our time. Here's the story. He was born way down in the South in New Orleans, Louisiana. His mama was a teacher, his old man was a dentist, and his parents actually wanted young Andrew to grow up to be a dentist too, but it's a damn good thing he broke from the tradition. He went to high school, graduated at the age of 15, and then got a degree from Howard University. Andrew ended up as a pastor in Bama. That would be your Alabama. Now, along the way, he became involved in a very important movement at the time, the Civil Rights Movement, where he met a young man by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. Eventually, Young became one of King's closest advisors. And he stayed with him until Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. Now, that did not stop Andrew Young. A few years later, he ran for Congress and served 4 years in the House of Representatives as a Democrat. And it is worth noting that Young was the first black congressman from Georgia in 100 years. Then in 1977, another first. Under then-President Jimmy Carter, Andrew became the first African-American to serve as a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. But it wasn't an easy road. Actually, nothing in the Carter administration was. You see, Young met secretly with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and while meeting with the PLO, that was illegal under American law. Young had to resign, but he didn't stop. 1981, he was elected mayor of Atlanta, and at the time, Atlanta was one of the poorest cities in America. But as mayor throughout the 80s, Andrew Young turned the city around. He brought in billions of dollars in private investment and, with corporate investment, helped secure the 1996 Olympics, thought to be one of the most successful games in recent memory. Young is now producing documentaries. His latest project is called Walking with Guns. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Young. Great to see you. Thank you so much for coming. There are so many things we could talk about, sir. But now here we are, and in January, the first African-American president of the United States of America, and you are a civil rights leader. You were with Dr. Martin Luther King for much of his journey, and what do you think about where we are now?
Well, one thing to think is that the American people made an incredible vote of maturity. They did the wise thing. They voted for the most intelligent, visionary. In fact, I'm a preacher, so you got to cut me a little slack.
Do your thing.
Because I said that they chose faith over fear. They chose grace over greed. And they chose vision over violence. And Barack Obama offered them faith in the future, offered them a graceful approach to the challenges and problems of history, and said we could do it without violence if we talk to people and listen to people and work with people.
Now, all this being said in your optimism for today, you didn't endorse Barack Obama. You endorsed Hillary Clinton.
Well, I knew her. I had known Hillary.
Didn't you say she was just as black as Barack Obama?
Well,
I mean, they said
I don't know whether we can get away with it.
You can say whatever you want.
Yeah. I said she'd been called bitch a whole lot more than he'd been called nigger. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is equal discrimination. And, but I didn't know him. If I had known him as I know him now, and if I had known the economic crash that was coming as quick as it did, I might have supported him first. Mm-hmm. But it's a no-lose situation.
Sure.
Either one. I really thought that the Republicans were setting him up. And I couldn't imagine a 40-year-old black man that had no trash in his past.
Yeah. You, a civil rights leader, becoming the mayor of Atlanta. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is something to be said about that moment, isn't there? Did you think of Dr. King and all of those conversations you had about the South?
I did, and I realized that Dr. King would not have imagined that I could get to be mayor of Atlanta.
Is that because he knew you and thought there's no way this guy's going to be the mayor?
Well, he used to say, you know, it's too bad you didn't go to Morehouse College. You know, you'd be somebody. And you were kind of goof off in college, and I was. He said, we'd have made a scholar out if you'd gone to Morehouse. So he was always giving me a hard time.
Yeah.
So he would have probably been surprised that I succeeded.
You were the one guy that when Martin Luther King walked by, you're like, I can't believe you just said that. I can't believe you just said that.
No, the thing about Martin Luther King was he was about like you. I mean, he would have been in the privacy. You're how old now?
36.
So he was 39 when he was killed. So I knew him between 29 and 39, and we were together all the time. And I watched your show, you know, sitting around here, and he was very, very, always picking people's brains for questions, always kidding, always joking, always clowning and jiving, imitating. Sometimes he could sound like a preacher imitating Chris Rock. That was not Chris Rock then, it was more Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
But he was just a regular guy who, as my daughter said, you all were just some get-down brothers who were in the right place at the right time, and you did the right thing, even though you knew it could kill you.
And killed so many.
And did, but he would, that was one of his favorite jokes. He would preach your funeral. You know, I mean, he'd say, well, somebody's gonna get killed, you know. And it might as well be you. He said, but don't worry, I will lift you up. And when I get through preaching about you, everybody's going to think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. See? But then he'd start preaching your funeral.
But did you need that at the time? Like, did you need that kind of levity?
You needed that because he never let us get too serious about death, because from the time he was 26 to the time he was 39, almost every year something happened that led him to the threshold of death. So he said, I live with death every day. And he said, everybody does. You don't have anything to say about when you die. The only thing you have something to say about is how you live. So live for something so that if you're killed doing it, you'll be proud and people will continue it. Don't do anything that you're ashamed. Don't get killed, you know, just jaywalking and getting hit by a truck.
It actually kind of, in a sense, brings me to what I want to talk about is the work you're doing that you did with T.I. In that, you look at all the violence that happened in the early days when you were a young man to the state of the urban center in many cities, but certainly in America right now, and talk about that. And I mean, tell people what you're doing with T.I.
Well, T.I. was coming out of a club in Cincinnati, and something happened. There was a little altercation in the club. When he came out, the guys who were had the conflict drove by his car and shot it up. His best friend was killed. The girl he was with was wounded, and he just barely escaped. Then when he got back home, everybody started calling his house, we know where you live, we're going to finish the job. It was almost like in the Wyatt Earp, you know, Billy the Kid days. Everybody wanted to make a name for themselves by killing somebody more important than them. And he says, the problem with being successful when you're young is that people get so jealous. If they can't be you, they think they can be somebody by killing you. So he felt like he needed to defend himself. And he tried to buy some weapons, and he had been arrested as a younger fella. So he had been convicted of a felony. So a felon trying to buy AK-47s got arrested.
Yeah.
Well, I could understand his fears, and I could understand his insecurities, but the courts did a very good thing. They said, look, instead of just locking you up, we're going to give you a year to do 1,000 hours of volunteer service. That's a lot of time.
Yeah.
And we want you to try to see if you can reach out and talk to young people and convince them that violence is not the way.
But did he know that violence wasn't the way? Like, how does he get to that point?
Then he came to me and said, how did you all get along, in your time? And I was very frank with him. we knew our opponents had guns, and the way we got along was by making it public that we had no guns, and that if they wanted to shoot us, they had to shoot us down in cold blood, and we were going to come out in the open and confront them openly. Well, that's a little difficult for him to do nowadays, see? So we started just talking. He came by the house with a bunch of his I don't know what they call it, Rat Pack, we used to call it, but
his friends.
They're and we sat around and talked, and we tried to think out how you deal with success.
But when you help young men who go through this challenging time in their life, you would think people would look at you and say, Andrew, you've done a lot of great work in your life. Congratulations on helping a man with a gun problem. But man, a lot of Christians got mad at you.
Not really.
A lot of people got mad at you.
Well, if they got mad with me, they're going to hell.
Do you have that much power?
No, but I mean, that's exactly what Jesus did. Mm-hmm. Jesus ran around with some rowdy folk, see? And the respectable religious people of his time did not get along with Jesus very well. In fact, they killed him.
Yeah, they certainly did.
Yeah. And, but the one thing we say in the Lord's Prayer is we ask God to forgive us as we forgive others, which means if we don't reach out and forgive others, we're not going to be forgiven our sins. Now,
one world, right?
I would not be anything. I can stop and remember the people who helped me on the way. I mean, Sunday school teachers, coaches, guy that taught me to box and defend myself, and also said, if you know how to fight, you don't have to fight. My father, grandfather, all of us are here because somebody gave us a helping hand. And so the least we can do, and the most important thing we can do, is lend a helping hand to somebody else.
It's great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Good.
Andrew Young, everybody. You've got to see this documentary called Walking with Guns. We'll be right back.